You're listening to Liberty USA, sponsored by County Citizens Defending Freedom. As an American, you have freedom flowing through your DNA, and we are here to help educate, empower, and encourage you to stand for your freedom.
Hello, County Citizens. Will you please help me welcome KrisAnne Hall?
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, no, my pleasure, for sure.
I'm excited to talk about, some of the things we're going to dig into, but is this your first time in Lakeland?
No, actually, I've been traveling and teaching the Constitution, American history across the country for 12 years.
Oh, wow.
So I've been to almost every city, major kind of city, in even small major cities like Lakeland, in Florida in those 12 years. And I've been to 49 states. So
where do you call home?
We are in the Tampa area.
Gotcha. So I know you wear many hats.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain some of those to us?
Well, beside being a mom and a wife, my husband was a pastor for 10 years. We did mission work in Haiti for 4 years. Now we're both in Tampa teaching. We're professors at the River University School of Government. And my husband is also an evangelist still, so he does do preaching across the country as we travel, and I teach the Constitution. I also have a national nonprofit law firm, Liberty First Legal, where we do civil rights issues. I describe it as the ACLU, but the good guys, right? So we don't just do religious liberty as most conservative nonprofit law groups do. We don't just do First Amendment issues. We do every aspect of civil rights, and we haven't been around for a long time. I've practiced constitutional law since 2007.
Oh, wow.
I was a prosecutor for the state of Florida for nearly a decade. And so I have a long experience in the law, but our law firm is really just now two years old. And we have helped hundreds of people obtain their religious exemptions.
Wow.
from the vaccinations, and that's everybody: students, professors, teachers, coaches, military personnel, cadets, that sort of thing.
Wow. So I love to ask this question. Did you always grow up with a conservative view of politics?
No, actually, I was a hardcore socialist.
Really?
I was a hardcore socialist.
And what age is this?
Until I was about 27.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was also an atheist. The big contradiction of atheists, right? I hated the God I didn't believe in. And so it wasn't until later in life that all that changed for me.
Wow. So what kind of sparked that change?
Yeah, so I didn't have epiphany, I didn't wake up one morning and go, oh, I've been wrong my whole life. I had more, I'm a little bit more stubborn minded, so I had to have a sanctification process. And so I came up in a sort of social liberal family, fiscally conservative, but social liberal. And I was raised believing that, government is there to take care of us, and that it's our fair share to pay for other people who need help, who can't get along on their own. And so I was raised with a very hard work ethic, right? So I'm a very hard worker. And I put myself through college, the undergraduate degree in biochemistry, paid for everything, student loans, all by myself, had 3 jobs, Wow. And then when I graduated, I was like, yes, I have arrived, right? And so I got my paycheck, and it was sort of shocking to me how much money was being taken from me. Because in my mind of fairness, right, here I have all by myself, loans to prove it, 3 jobs, 4 years, living on tuna fish and crackers, so I could have an education to have a better station in life. So hard work means, hey, I should be able to reap the benefits of my hard work. And our fairness should mean that. And so I'm looking around and I'm thinking, wait a minute, there's something wrong here, because I believe that as a society, we have a moral obligation to help people who can't help themselves. But I started realizing that there were a lot of people not working still that weren't working when I started college, and they're taking my money. Not because they can't do something, not because they're disabled or they're widowed or they're orphaned, but because they've made bad choices and they don't want to make sacrifices. And so that was sort of my awakening, thinking, wait a minute, this really isn't what fairness is about, right? This is a little bit more like theft. And then I had a family and realized, hey, look, it doesn't take a village to raise a family, because the bottom line is who my child becomes is a reflection on me, not on the government, right? And then I think it was 2001, I gave my life to Christ, and I realized that the Creator is the one who gave me my rights. Not documents, not government, not law, not people. And it has to be. My rights must come from my Creator. Because if they do not come from God, if they come from documents, if they come from people, if they come from politicians, then they're not rights at all. They're privileges. Because you see, the power to give inherently contains the power to take. And so if politicians are giving me these rights, finger quotes rights, then they can also take them away. Then they're no longer rights, they're privileges. And so that was sort of the mountaintop version of my transformation process.
And then is that when you segued into the Constitution area of your work?
I don't really know where all of that fell in the timeline of things, because I gave my life to Christ after my first year of law school. And in law school, things started clicking. I ran across 2 history books, one called Founding Brothers by Joseph Ellis, and the other called 1776 by David McCullough. And I've never really been a history person, and in school I hated it, because in school I don't know if it's done on purpose or just out of negligence or ignorance about how to really teach people. But I always thought that history was boring because all you had to do was memorize dates and learn about dead people, right? And so that's just not what history is, right? History is amazing, and it's prophetic. Patrick Henry said, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that's the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past. Because human nature never changes, right? So I read these books, and the first thing that occurred to me reading the Founding Brothers by Joseph Ellis was how amazing these people were, how principled they were, how courageous they were. And then I was reading 1776 and the miraculous hand of God, even working through the weather patterns that brought about the possibility of our independence. I don't even know if David McCullough is a Christian or not, but it was undeniable, right? And that really sparked an interest in me to read more about these people. And so I started reading the letters that they wrote to each other, which felt kind of voyeuristic, right? Eavesdropping on their conversations, which was really kind of fun. And in that, I started discovering that the things they were telling me in law school about the Constitution were skewed at best and most accurately described as completely inaccurate. And so my passion for learning about the Constitution really stems from a personality trait, that sort of righteous indignation, that little burst of rebellion that comes up that is like, what the heck? Why are you guys teaching me all these lies? Stop teaching me lies when the truth is right there. I can just read it for myself and find it. And so that's really where my passion for the Constitution began.
That's a question that I've been debating in my head with. I wasn't a huge history fan growing up either. But then in college, when I had to make a decision and decide what am I going to believe and which way am I going to go.
Right.
And especially now a couple years out, I'm looking back and I'm seeing everything that's going on regarding COVID and where we are politically. And I'm looking back at the history I was taught in school and I'm like, I wonder how much of this information is accurate.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking like, the history of what's happening now is going to be told a lot differently.
Yes.
Maybe. I won't say for sure, but it might be to some people.
I would say you always
taught differently than how you and I saw COVID happen in the States. And so that's just made me think, like, what other things was I taught during school that there's another side.
Right.
And maybe that other side was right.
Yeah. Well, with any study that you do in history and any sort of perception of what happened, you have to understand there's three sides. There's one side, another side, and then what really happened.
Right.
Because as a former prosecutor, I can tell you that three people can stand and watch the same event happen, and three people will have three different stories about what actually happened, because it all has to do with what was our direct involvement in that. What's the history of our relationships with that involvement? What's our understanding, in perception of that involvement? And that's just simply the way history goes. And that's why, just a little bonus, as I say to my students, a little bonus for your educational dollar. If you really want an accurate understanding of history, you have to read what we call original source. You cannot read history books unless those books are written by the people who lived that history. So any backward-looking view of history is, inaccurate at best. And most of the time, the problem with the history books that we have today, textbooks, even the history books for enjoyment purposes, they've been completely co-opted by psychologists and revisionist historians. And so if you want to know about an event in history, you have to read that history told by someone who actually lived it. For example, the best history book on our revolutionary period is written by actually the woman who was the first American woman historian. Yeah, and she was also the first American woman playwright. She wrote Shakespearean-style plays to poke fun at the British government and encourage the liberty movement. She was actually even later on the first American woman political advisor. The men that you and I and most people listening or watching would be thinking of as the founding fathers, they went to her for advice.
Wow. And
her name is Mercy Otis Warren. And she wrote a 3-volume set called The Rise, Progress, and Termination of the American Revolution. It spans over 100 years of history. And she says, I have to write this history because I lived it. And so anybody out there who really wants to know, the truth, the down and the dirty of what really happened intimately in that period, you have to go to her. She was there.
So I am actually a direct descendant of Betsy Ross.
Nice.
She was and I might mess up how many greats I use, but great aunt.
Yeah.
And so.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So you are a daughter of the American Revolution.
Basically.
Yeah, no, really, seriously. You could join, they have a national groups called the Daughters of the American Revolution, and they purpose themselves to preserve that part of our American history with great accuracy. And all you have to do is show documentation of your lineage, and you get to be a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution.
Oh, wow. I'm going to have to check into that.
Absolutely.
Speaking of the Constitution, I have one question that I'm very passionate about, and that is something that's circulating the media very heavily right now, and that is Roe versus Wade.
Right.
Can you first explain to our listeners what Roe versus Wade is?
So Roe v. Wade is a Supreme Court opinion that put restrictions on that. I have to say this accurately. Roe v. Wade is a Supreme Court opinion that imposed restrictions upon the ability of a state to create laws restricting abortion. But from a constitutional perspective, Roe versus Wade does not have the authority that our society has adopted as its authority. One of the greatest misnomers that you get regarding Roe v. Wade is, you've probably heard this, that Roe v. Wade is the law of the land.
Right.
That is not correct. Roe v. Wade is a Supreme Court opinion issued by the Supreme Court, the federal judiciary, right? Judges don't write laws. Legislators write laws. So Roe v. Wade is not the law of the land. Roe v. Wade is a Supreme Court opinion. And interestingly enough, because we don't teach the proper role and division of government anymore, We don't even realize that from the get-go, Roe v. Wade was an unconstitutionally established opinion. So Article 3 of the Constitution outlines the specific delegation of jurisdiction to the Supreme Court. One thing that the Supreme Court is not granted jurisdiction to are cases that involve a person and their own state. Any judgment, any disagreement, any lawsuit that involves a person in their own state was specifically and purposefully not put into the hands of the federal judiciary and was to be reserved to the state judiciary. Now, what we've done over the years is through a misapplication of the 14th Amendment is we've expanded judicial jurisdiction unconstitutionally, even unconstitutionally according to the 14th Amendment. And that's what this new draft opinion recognizes, that Roe v. Wade was unconstitutionally decided from the very beginning. And Alito, this is a beautifully crafted opinion. I mean, in all the Supreme Court opinions that I've read, and I have read Supreme Court opinions dating back to British courts, 1766, 1665. This is the most detailed and most diligent account in a Supreme Court opinion that I have read in this time. So Alito really understood the ramifications, the impact that this would have. And he crossed all his T's, dotted all his I's, and did really significant research and organized a very excellent opinion. And so what Alito basically does is, because it's 98 pages, now there's a lot of reference material in there, which he includes, which is incredible because not all Supreme Court opinions even go to that trouble to incorporate all that resource in there. But Alito had to know. And the majority opinion, on the bench, which would be a minimum of a 4-3, right? Because the newest Justice, Brown Jackson, can't render an opinion on this because she didn't sit to hear the arguments, right? So the 5-3 would be the majority opinion in this point because you usually work with 9 justices. And since Brown Jackson can't be on there, you have 8. So that means the majority would have to be 5-3 because if it were 4-4, it'd be a tie, right? So you have a minimum of a 5-3 opinion here. And these 5 had to know that this was going to be a great political controversy, which is why they did what they did. And so what Alito has said is that Roe v. Wade was not a constitutionally decided opinion. It was an example of judicial activism, and that in order for the right to an abortion to exist and to create that right through the 14th Amendment, there must be a long-standing historical, social, societal precedent that says, for all these years, we have recognized abortion as a right. Now, it's not written in the Bill of Rights, but because for a long time, humanity, society has recognized this as an essential inherent right, it is through the 14th Amendment now protected by the Constitution. But Alito says, and accurately says, no, that's not true, because the right to abortion was never really asserted in society until the argument of Roe. For example, the right of a parent to have care, custody, and control of their child, very basically described as parental rights. Since there have been parents, since the beginning of time, people, cultures, societies, even laws have recognized that parents have an inherent, inalienable right to the care, custody, and control of their child. Well, parental rights are not listed in the Bill of Rights, but because of that long history of parental rights, our Constitution recognizes them through the 9th Amendment, through the 14th Amendment, as inherent rights to be protected through the Constitution. So unlike parental rights, the right to abortion is not a long-standing recognized right of the people. It's an invention. And that's basically what Alito says. And now he says this because, and this is important, because it's not protected by the U.S. Constitution, it is therefore not a federal issue. So the question of abortion goes back to the states. Because the 10th Amendment says that the powers that are not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So since abortion is not a federal issue, it's an issue reserved to the states. So all of this hysteria, and 99.9% of what you're seeing in social media and the news is completely and totally false. Nothing changes at the state level with this opinion. So if you live in Massachusetts, where the state laws are very liberal on abortion, nothing changes for you. If you live in Oklahoma, who have the most stringent restrictions on abortion, nothing changes. And so really the only thing that changes is a potential that states could say, we want more restrictions on abortion. A potential for states to say, we want fewer restrictions on abortion. Because now abortion will be handled from a state-to-state basis.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So abortion will now be handled at a state-to-state basis.
Yes.
So then how can, like, Florida, and what was the state you said had strict abortion laws? Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. How can they create strict abortion laws? And then we have Massachusetts that...
Well, because, yeah, I do understand what you're saying, but what we have to do is have like a foundational understanding of what states actually are. Okay. And the disadvantages that we have is that we don't teach this, right? So,
because I'm thinking in my head, okay, it's going to go back to the states, but now I'm seeing all these states that either have restrictions or don't, right. And I'm like, but hasn't it always been given to the states? I guess is my question.
Okay, so your question is sort of twofold. So let's look at this. Each state is an independent sovereign government. Okay, the only legal issues that the federal government has control over at the state level are things that are delegated through the Constitution. Article 6, just for those who want to look this up, it's Article 6, Clause 2 of the Constitution. This Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land, and the laws of the United States made in pursuance to the Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. So when the federal government is exercising a delegated power and they create laws, then that law is a uniform application across the states. But when those things are not delegated to the federal government, they are left to the individual states. So the individual states can make their individual laws. Now, Roe v. Wade established a false ceiling, or I guess basement. It depends on what perspective you're looking at, right? Mm-hmm. Created a false ceiling that said, okay, you can have variation between the states to a certain point, right?
Okay.
So when you hit that point, now you have to allow abortion, right? So Roe v. Wade said viability, which is a very arbitrary term. And viability means, can the baby live outside the womb? Mm-hmm. That's basically viability. Now, we already know that date changes with technology. And that really should not be how we define life, right? For example, are you alive right now?
Yes.
Okay. You're alive here on this earth. Mm-hmm. If I eject you into space, can you live without a suit?
No.
No. If I eject you into space and you can't live, does that mean you were not alive here on earth? You see, a baby is alive in its nutrient world in the womb. Mm-hmm. If I pull it out of its nutrient womb and it dies, Does that mean it was not alive?
Right.
So it's not logical. It makes no logical sense. It makes no scientific sense. You know, my undergraduate degree is in biochemistry, so I understand the biology of this, right? And so what we had was the Supreme Court saying there's this ceiling. Once you hit this point of pre-viability, then you have to allow abortion. Mm-hmm. But what you actually said was consistent and constitutionally accurate. Because remember, I told you the Supreme Court didn't have jurisdiction over this issue of abortion. Mm-hmm. So it was always something that should have been reserved to the states, right? Mm-hmm. And because it's always something that should have been reserved to the states, in its opinion that is inconsistent with the Constitution, Article 6, Clause 2 of the Constitution made that opinion null and void for everyone but Roe and Wade.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Which is why this challenge comes in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. It's why Oklahoma already has, pre this draft release, the most strict restrictions on abortion, because the states realized, hey, the federal government doesn't have jurisdiction over this. Therefore, this opinion doesn't apply to us. So we're going to create our laws based on the principles and the desires for protection of life based on the people of our state.
Okay, I understand.
Does that make sense now?
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. So I guess
it shouldn't be this complicated. It shouldn't take that long of a discussion. But because we have failed, and it's not just your generation, we have failed for over 100 years to teach these fundamental truths about our Constitution, the proper role of government, the separation of powers between the state and the federal government, and how it all works together.
So I guess in a roundabout way, when Roe v. Wade is overturned, nothing will change, just the potential for states to realize that they've always had power.
Absolutely. That is a beautiful summarization of what's happening.
I'm just processing it all in my head as you're talking.
It's great. No, I love it. You get it. You're able to articulate that in that way, and it sort of makes me feel good that I was able to sort of teach it.
Good. My mom will be happy. Yeah. So what was your reaction when you saw the draft was leaked? Because I didn't even know that it was up for consideration.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, I almost, is this fake news? Is this another article that's being leaked? Or,
we've been diligently watching this. Those of us in the constitutional law world, those who are involved in the argument, abortion, protection of life, have been anticipating this. Mm-hmm. We knew this was coming. But this is a very bad thing for America that this draft was released, because it's not supposed to happen that way. Okay, this is why I call this judicial terrorism. You see, the court is a very insulated, independent body, so that the legislature doesn't have any manipulative control over it. So the executive branch doesn't have any manipulative control over that. And the judges are not elected by the people, so that the politics are not supposed to have manipulative control. The judges are to be bound by the Constitution alone, not politics, not the whim or the fluctuations of society, but by the Constitution alone. That is the supreme predominant standard. When they get swayed by politics, when they become activist judges, those who created the judicial office called that bad behavior and grounds for impeachment. Mm-hmm. So the justices are supposed to be shielded from external influence in their opinions. And in that insulation, they are to have a candid conversation about their opinions on these cases. So the process is, they hear the arguments. Then they...
And who is the one... Are each of them presenting their arguments for or against the case?
So here's how this works. They hear oral arguments, and then they retire for their personal deliberations. Okay. When they are in their personal deliberations, They can review all the record that has been presented to them. When they come to their decisions, now they can consult with others that actually hold their same, and they can even ask questions of the ones that don't hold the same. When they determine what the numbers are, right? Because in a general Supreme Court opinion, there's 9 justices. So when they tally their votes and they find out it's 5-4 or it's 6-3 or it's, 9-0, right? When they tally how the opinions fall among the judges, then they determine who will write the majority opinion. When the majority opinion is written, which is what we saw was the draft by Justice Alito, it is then disseminated to the justices, all of them, for their review. So then in a 5-4 opinion, those who hold the 4 opposite to the majority opinion, right, would then take the majority opinion and write what we call their dissent. And they would read the majority opinion and say, we don't agree with this, we don't agree with this, we don't agree with this, this is what we see, this is what we believe, and this is why we disagree, right? But it also goes to the judges that agree with the majority opinion so that they can independently write what we call a consent. Sometimes they consent in part and dissent in another part. And so you really have the opportunity to have 9 separate opinions.
Wow.
That never happens. It never happens, right? Because if the majority opinion is exactly what I think, why am I going to reinvent the wheel? And so that's why it's distributed, so they can have a candid conversation without social, emotional intervention. It seems a little strange to talk like that, given the fact that our entire Supreme Court is practically all built of emotional activist judges. But that's not how it's supposed to be, right? Part of that's because we don't appoint judges properly. You see, we're supposed to have confirmation hearings to judge whether justices are constitutionally solid, not whether they're conservative or liberal. Because we don't want a conservative judge any more than we want a liberal judge. Because a conservative judge is an activist judge. A liberal judge is an activist judge. We want judges that are neither conservative nor liberal, but constitutionally dedicated.
So that leads into my next question. Moving on from Roe v. Wade. You mentioned in a previous interview that you use the Constitution as a standard to see how well the current and past presidents have done. And I loved that because it goes into what you just explained, right, that you don't want an activist on either side, that it's better to be in the middle and base things off the Constitution. So can we go through some presidents, and can you explain to me your version of if they followed the Constitution well?
I don't even think we have to list individual presidents, because I can describe to you the whole thing in a nutshell, right?
Go ahead.
So what I have a podcast as well, the KrisAnne Hall Show. And what I like to do during presidential elections is go to presidential platforms, what they have on their website. And then I compare, because a presidential platform is a promise from the candidate to the people. And so I go and I look at their platform, and I don't do what most talking heads, pundits do, compare them to each other. I compare each individual platform with the only standard that matters, the Constitution. You see, the tagline for my podcast is liberty over security, principle over party, and truth over personality. So a Republican, Democrat, Constitution Party, Green Party, Independent, whoever you are, you get judged by the document that you're going to raise and swear your oath to, right? And what I have found, because I have done this every year since I got started, and it initially really sort of bothered me and puzzled me, because what I found was there was not a single presidential candidate with a constitutionally based platform.
Really?
Not a single one. I was like, not even in the Constitution Party was the presidential candidate's platform constitutionally based, right?
Oh my gosh.
And so it really bothered me. So I kept thinking about it. I kept wondering, I kept researching, and then I realized, what is the purpose of a presidential platform? I mean, I already told you. To answer the questions the people have of the presidential candidate. Why don't we have a single constitutionally based presidential platform? Because the people are not asking their presidents to be constitutional. The people are asking their presidents, what are you going to do for me? And that is the basis for every presidential platform. What are you going to do for me? Well, here's my platform, what I'm going to do for you. And that question and that answer in that way is why every single president has had an unconstitutional platform from day one. Because Article 2 of the Constitution outlines the power delegated to the president. And the president holds absolutely no authority to touch the lives of the people directly. The only major authority the president actually holds, he doesn't get to exercise on his own. It's always done through the consent of the Senate. The president has the authority to make treaties with the Senate. Consent. The president has the authority to to nominate justices, but it's the Senate that actually appoints them. Same with cabinet members and ambassadors. The only real autonomous power the president has is to offer pardons and reprieves for people who are charged with federal crimes and to call the Congress into session in emergency. That is the only power the president holds. Not jobs, not taxes, not anything.
Was there any president that was a little closer than the other ones?
No.
That's a shame.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but it's not and until you realize the source of the problem is really the people misunderstanding, being miseducated on what the proper role and duty of the president is. The president was created for the sole purpose to be an ambassador on behalf of the states in foreign affairs. That's it. He has no domestic authority, period.
Which, being transparent, this is making me consider how I see political party members.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because in the past, I haven't compared it to the Constitution. I've compared it to what I want to see out of my president.
Right.
Taxes, freedom, abortion, all of those things are what I've compared, which is probably what you found on their websites.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right.
So that's good. That's good information for me and for our listeners.
Well, and
remind us.
Absolutely. And what's amazing is when you get the real proper constitutional perspective, you understand you really have more control over those issues because those issues do not rest in the hands of the president. The majority of them rest in the hands of your state where you have more control.
How can we protect our rights moving forward?
Well, protection of our rights is really hinges on properly understanding your rights. I can give you a quote from Samuel Adams. He said, "No people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved." He said, on the contrary, when the people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders. So the key to securing our rights is knowledge and courage, right? So first you have to know the knowledge. You have to have the knowledge. What are our rights? What are our ways of securing them? What's the proper role of government? Which is what we're going to talk about tonight in our class that we're having here. And it's a class that I teach all over the country. We have online classes. We have an online study program called libertyfirstsociety.com where we teach American history and all these constitutional standards from an original author's perspective, right? The people who actually wrote and ratified the Constitution told us exactly how it was supposed to work. And remember, when you're learning history, when you're studying documents, the only real authoritative source comes from those who actually wrote the document, right? And so the key to securing your rights is knowing what they are, where they come from, and what are the strongest mechanisms of check and balance, right? And I would say, first and foremost, we talked about this before, was sort of my transformation process, understanding that your rights don't come from the Constitution. One of my sort of fingers across the chalkboard moments is when people say constitutional rights or First Amendment rights or Second Amendment rights, because what they're actually saying is your rights come from the Constitution. Constitutional, A-L, that suffix means to be derived from. If you say First Amendment rights, that means your rights come from the First Amendment. If you say Second Amendment rights, then you think your right to keep and bear arms comes from the Second Amendment. It's really the opposite. These rights existed before the Constitution. The Constitution was written to remind us of our rights so that we would secure them and prevent government from intruding upon our rights. Mm-hmm. And so first and foremost, we must know that our rights come from a higher power. Mm-hmm. They don't come from documents. Because if they come from the Constitution, guess what happens when you amend the Constitution, right? Then somebody believes you change rights, and then they're not rights, they're privileges. Mm-hmm. So first off, you have to understand where your rights come from. They come from a higher power, not from government, not from documents, not from people, not from laws. Second, then you have to understand the proper role of government. The Declaration of Independence is a teaching aid for that. The Declaration of Independence teaches us that the only purpose of any government is to secure our rights. The Declaration of Independence also teaches us that the measure of a just government is a government that is limited to the consent of the people. So you have to know your rights come from a higher power. You have to know the purpose of government is to secure your rights, and the just government is one that operates only through your consent. So then you have to know what your consent is. And in America, we wrote it down. Our consent to federal power is the U.S. Constitution. Our consent to state power is the state constitution. And that's where you got to begin. It sounds like a lot, but it really, really isn't, because it's really, really simple to understand.
That's another great concept you brought up. Yeah, you have my mind turning.
Yay! Mm-hmm. That's my job.
So would you prefer people say God-given rights?
Natural rights.
Natural rights.
Inherent rights.
Okay.
I mean, I believe they're God-given. Mm-hmm. But you see, America's built on a biblical worldview which encompasses liberty, free will, right? Biblical worldview teaches that God created people with free will, right? So God doesn't strike you dead the moment you don't believe what he wants you to believe, right? And so inherent in for example, religious liberty, inherent in the religious liberty is the right to operate according to the dictates of your conscience, to worship God according to your dictates of your conscience. But also inherent in that concept and that understanding of religious liberty is the right to not believe, to not worship, to not believe in any God at all, right? So liberty in and of itself, yes, is God-given, but you don't have to believe in God to have them. You must, however, as we established before, believe in a higher power. Right? So inherent rights, inalienable rights, natural rights. Our founders called them the rights that are derived from the first law of nature, the duty of self-preservation.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, KrisAnne, thank you so much for sharing all of this information with us and being...
It's a lot, though.
It is.
I mean, we went through, what has it been, like an hour? We went through less than an hour. It's been a lot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But thank you for coming on Liberty USA and sharing all that wonderful information with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I'll come back anytime.
Great.
And it's really fun to be in studio. Mm-hmm. A lot of times I do interviews, Skype or Zoom or something, but it's so much more fun to actually be sitting across the table with people. So I want to thank you for that opportunity.
Of course, come back anytime.
Yep.
Thank you for tuning in to Liberty USA, sponsored by County Citizens Defending Freedom. Give us a like or drop a comment, follow us on social media, and share with your friends. If you liked what you heard, support our mission in empowering American citizens to defend their freedoms and liberty at the local level. Learn more and fund your freedom today by donating at ccdfusa.com. Remember, freedom is in your DNA.